Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So, yesterday we began the celebration in Sri Vrindavan Dham of the disappearance anniversary of Srila Jiva Goswami. In Vrindavan, there's a tradition to celebrate only the disappearance. They do not celebrate the appearance day of the Goswamis. They combine the celebration of the appearance and the disappearance on the same day as the disappearance occurs. And there's a greater emphasis on disappearance because they are entering into Nitya Leela and they combine the two. And as a consequence, the celebration is very grand. And the celebration of Srila Jiva Goswami's disappearance, it occurs in specifically in the Sri Sri Radha Damodar Mandir in Seva Kunj. And Sri Sri Radha Damodar are the worshipable deities of Srila Jiva Goswami. These deities are the original deities whom Srila Jiva Goswami was worshipping. In other words, there's been no change in terms of them being taken out of Vrindavan. But in tradition, even if the deities are taken out of Vrindavan, as is the case with Srila Rupa Goswami, Sri Sri Radha Govindaji, who are now in Jaipur and they're receiving service in Jaipur, the deities never leave. Sri Sri Radha Govindaji are fully present in the Radha Govinda Mandir. And the reason is that Srimati Radharani, she never leaves Vrindavan. So temporarily, the deities were given shelter in the neighboring state of Rajasthan. This was during the Islamic invasion, and as a consequence, they had to take the deities out. But Radharani never leaves Vrindavan. Krishna never leaves Vrindavan. As a consequence, the deities who were replaced in Sri Sri Radha Govind Mandir here are also the original Radha Govindjis because they never leave. So this is the understanding of the Rajvasis. Now, what is important is for us to meditate on the specific life and the offering of our acharyas, especially on the day of departure or the anniversary of departure. And this is done for us to be able to connect with them and for us to be able to appreciate their offering, for us to be able to have some grounding in their contribution. They're eternally present. They are eternally present, and as a consequence, a very serious practitioner of bhakti who is supposed to receive guidance from anyone in the lineage can receive guidance from such personalities in addition to their spiritual master. So there is the Diksha Guru, and then there are so many who have preceded him who are Siksha Gurus. Our Srila Prabhupada is the most prominent Siksha Guru for us, and that has been established. And before Srila Prabhupada, his Guru Maharaj, and the lineage and the Goswamis, these are all Siksha Gurus. So they are all very much available in terms of accessible, in terms of giving mercy, in terms of being able to provide guidance to whoever becomes, I would say, develops a certain sense of attachment to them. They make themselves available because that availability is there. So it is not so much that the disappearance of their physical manifestation means that there is permanent disappearance. They've entered into Nitya Leela, and whilst they have entered into Nitya Leela, which means that they are serving the divine couple in their original forms as the servants of Srimati Radharani, as the case may be, even though that is happening, we still have them in the rupa of the worshipper, or rather the servitor of Lord Chaitanya. And that form is also available, which means that even though they have departed for the spiritual sky, by addressing the departed Vaishnava as Srila Jiva Goswami, Srila Rupa Goswami, we are connecting to them as principally as Siksha Gurus for us to be able to move forward, because this was their sadhaka deha, which means that there are two different types of body. One is the body in which we perform sadhana, which is the physical body, and then there is the siddha deha, which is the perfected body, where there is a spiritual form that is existing in the spiritual sky in Goloka, which eternally serves the divine couple and is a servant of the servant of the servant of the divine couple. And that form is the perfected form, which is basically the form where the divine couple receives service. However, there is the sadhaka deha. In terms of sadhana or sadhaka deha, the Goswamis of Vrindavan exhibited their pastimes of being extraordinarily, extraordinarily humble and very, very focused, to the point where, for most part of their existence in Vrindavan, they did not even take up shelter in a constructed home. In other words, they used to sit under different trees and they used to chant Harinam. And what is fascinating is that uh, that is basically the proof of concept for us to follow. Because the chanting of Harinam in a very pure way is practically manifested realizations, and those realizations of the departed Vaishnavas, in other words, the acharyas who were present and who have departed for the spiritual sky, their contribution has come from pure chanting of Harinam, which means that the entire Gaudiya Vaishnava lineage, as we see it, that includes Srila Prabhupada's books, because Srila Prabhupada drew heavily from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and the writings of Srila Jiva Goswami in the Sandarbhas. All the Bhagavatam translations came from there. In other words, it was drawn very heavily from their translations, and the purports were written based on and consistent with what they had offered, and consistent to that time, place, and circumstances. So the point being, the entire world, the entire universe of Gaudiya Vaishnavas, as we see it, the entire world of Gaudiya Vaishnavas, be it within ISKCON or the Gaudiya Mat and the various branches, they're all being sustained by the realizations of a handful of souls who dedicated themselves to the pure chanting of Harinam. This is fascinating. This is not a matter of a lot of infrastructure. It is not even a matter of having the best communication equipment. It is not even a matter of being able to travel. They sat under trees, and all of them had taken Kshetra sannyas. Srila Jiva Goswami never left Vrindavan because he was instructed by Mahaprabhu to stay in Vrindavan. So he stayed in Vrindavan. They all basically were bound to the land of Vrindavan, Vraja Mandal, not necessarily the Vrindavan area, but Vraja Mandal. And as a consequence, they never left. So what is fascinating to us is to see an example where if one dedicates themselves to the simple instruction given by Mahaprabhu, which is to dedicate ourselves to Nam Bhajan, then that Nam has the capacity to unfold within our hearts and practically reveal who we are and reveal the nature of our relationship with Krishna, which is to practically reveal Him in our heart and then also engage us in His service wonderfully. All of this is practically possible with the chanting of Harinam. So, if one were to ask as to what is the first step that one ought to take in terms of advancing in this service, what is the first and last step one ought to take in terms of being able to offer anything substantial to their guru, to the parampara, then one should understand that that service cannot begin without serious chanting of Harinam. It cannot. We have to take precedent, we have to take principle, we have to take examples and precepts from those who have succeeded. Why, why go about reinventing the wheel? You see, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. We have proof, we have precedent, we have precepts that these wonderful souls, 6 or 7 Goswamis, in other words, handful of devotees of Mahaprabhu, they empowered the entire Gaudiya Vaishnava Siddhanta, the lineage. And what we are today is simply being a manifestation of their mercy, which means that our own knowledge of Gaudiya Vaishnavism has come from that pure chanting of these devotees who sat under trees, completely unmindful of every other occupation, which means that they never really envisioned broadcasting, they never envisioned publishing, because some of us want to do that. We all have objectives of wanting to broadcast, wanting to publish, which is all wonderful, but that cannot be the objective. You see, you can never write a book with the objective of publishing, because if you do write a book with the objective of publishing, especially sacred literature, the realizations won't come, because there's a little bit of ahamkar which is also attached to this particular prospect of wanting to publish, and it ruins everything. But on the other hand, if one takes up service on the head and they write down the realizations and then they very deeply cry out for help and then document those realizations become extraordinarily powerful and useful to the entire Vaishnava community. So the Goswamis did not want to publish. They did not have desires to publish. So which means that they had no desire, there was no hankering to be recognized. They had no hankering to receive fame. What was in those writings? Those writings were pure and they contained the consistency and the entire power of Srimad Bhagavatam. As a consequence, it had to spread around the world. And those writings are sustaining us. So one has to take precept from this, understanding very clearly that if you have to offer something serious to the entire world body of Vaishnavas, we have to become serious first. And seriousness in our business means becoming serious chanters. Yeah. If you're not going to chant seriously, then we just can't be proper servants. Because how can you serve if you do not know who you are? What is the possibility of sambandha? How deep will our sambandha be if we don't have recognition of who we are? We don't recognize the divine couple. We don't understand our sambandha. We don't understand the relationship. And if we cannot relate to who we are, we don't know who we are, we do not know Krishna and Srimati Radharani, we do not know the eternal servants, then what is the prospect of service? There isn't any possibility of service, because service is the product of love and surrender. How do you love and how do you surrender if we have amnesia and if we do not recognize who we are in the first place? Yeah, if there's partial amnesia, or to the extent to which the amnesia is present, to that extent the knowledge is going to be absent. There's ignorance. So the point being that if you really want to offer something serious, then Harinam is the way to start. Now, does it mean that all the service that the Vaishnavas are doing around the world is a complete waste of time? And do they all have to come down and sit under trees in Vrindavan and chant and then, wear one single cloth and walk around? That's not what the intention is, because that is just pretense. That is not going to work. Whatever is being offered now is wonderful, but the understanding has to be there that if we want to do something substantial, there has to be deeper sambandha. Yeah. Deeper sambandha means that we would allow Krishna to use us. If we can't allow Krishna to use us, then our own intelligence, our own capacity, our own understanding is going to be the outer limit of our offerings. Yeah. It is going to be bound by the outer limit of offerings. The opposite is being seen in the life of Srila Jiva Goswami. The opposite is being seen in the life of the Goswamis of Vrindavan. They had no desire to become famous. They had no desire to publish, but they are most widely published in Gaudiya Vaishnava theology. And their books are the foundation, the basis for everything else that is being spoken of today. Their books are the guiding principles. So we have to take cues, and not so much in terms of imitating, but at least following in the footsteps, understanding that the foundational principle is Nam Bhajan. Foundational principle is Nam. And if our Nam Bhajan is good, then everything else is going to just follow in proper order. It cannot be anything else first and then you come to Nam. Does it mean that every other service that's being done without serious chanting of Nam is completely useless? The answer is no, because if we live specifically outside Vrindavan or outside Navadvip Mandal, there's a need for service. Because if we cannot serve, we cannot purify our senses. To exist in the West, especially outside of Brajamandal, outside of Navadvip Mandal, if to exist outside of these places without direct service on a day-to-day basis is extraordinarily, extraordinarily dangerous, because it'll very soon we will be covered up by the dust of material energy. So we have to understand the fact that regardless of where we are, service is important, but it is more so if you are in the West, because we have to purify our senses. We need to be able to ensure that we're using our limbs in the service of Lord Gauranga, and by doing so, we are able to make progress. Our mission primarily is to make ourselves available to Lord Gauranga. By making ourselves available to him, then he is practically going to make the arrangement for us to serve the divine couple, which is he's non-different from Sri Radha and Krishna. but then he has mercifully presented himself in a unified form. So Sri Radha and Krishna in one body, in one form, is Lord Gauranga. By serving his mission of spreading the mission of Lord Gauranga, one receives benedictions from Lord Gauranga, and that particular benediction practically allows us to be able to move forward and to be able to reclaim our position, which means we are dependent on mercy, and mercy requires service to the mission of Lord Gauranga. And mercy comes from the service to the Lord mission of Lord Gauranga. As a consequence, service is super important, and it definitely is something that we should prioritize. But we should understand that our own ability to serve is only as good as our chanting. We should understand that as well. Our own ability to serve is only as good as our chanting, because as good or as bad as our chanting is our Sambandha Gyan. And without particularly having Sambandha, then we would not be able to love and we would not be able to surrender. If you cannot love, you can't surrender, because you really can't surrender without proper love. And if you cannot love and surrender, you can't serve, which is the reason why Sambandha is the first point, and then there can be Abhideya, which is service. Now, to talk a little bit about Srila Jiva Goswami, Srila Jiva Goswami Pad, he was born as Jiva. And this is very interesting. It is said that he was born as Jiva, but Mahaprabhu, when he first met him, he was an infant. And Srila Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis, they placed Jiva Goswami at the lotus feet of Mahaprabhu. And when they placed Jiva Goswami at the lotus feet of Mahaprabhu in Bengal, before Mahaprabhu left for his yatras at that point, then Mahaprabhu saw that this boy, this infant, started suckling Mahaprabhu's big toe. You can't imagine what it is. You can't even imagine the mercy that Srila Jiva Goswami received, even as an infant, because he had Srila Rupa and Sanatana as his uncles. He was placed at the lotus feet of Mahaprabhu, and he caught hold of Mahaprabhu's lotus feet and started sucking on Mahaprabhu's thumb. Mahaprabhu placed his lotus hands upon the head of Srila Jiva Goswami. It is said that he asked Srila Rupa and Sri Sanatana, "Whose Jiva is this? Whose Jiva is this?" And they said, "This Jiva is yours, dear Lord. All Jivas are yours. This Jiva is also yours." So Srila Jiva Goswami became Mahaprabhu's Jiva Goswami when he was an infant. And Srila Mahaprabhu ordered him at that point in time to basically, the orders were given for him to study Sanskrit and to spread the mission of Mahaprabhu's mission along with his uncles in Vrindavan. So when Srila Jiva Goswami, who is the nephew of Srila Rupa and Sanatana, Rupa and Sanatana, they had Srila Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis, they had a younger brother. His name was Sri Vallabha. Sri Vallabha was his original name. Mahaprabhu gave the name Anupama. He gave the name Anupama. So it was Srila Rupa, Srila Sanatana, and Srila Anupama. Now, this younger brother of Srila Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis, he was an extraordinarily fixed, single pointed, focused devotee of Lord Ram. He used to constantly chant Lord Ram's names, and he practically used to worship the deity of Lord Sri Ram day and night. He was a very, very staunch devotee of Lord Sri Ram. And at one point, Srila Rupa and Sri Sanatan Goswami wanted him to take up the chanting of Harinam, especially in the context of worshipping Krishna and Srimati Radharani. And he accepted that particular order, but he couldn't accomplish that at all, because that particular night he tried as much as he could to see Krishna as the worshipable Lord, but he couldn't because he was a dedicated servant of Lord Sri Ram. In Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, this devotee, Sri Anupama, he saw Lord Sri Ram. He practically saw his worshipable deity, Lord Sri Ram in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he was extremely devoted to Mahaprabhu. All three of them were very devoted. All of them left their services in Bengal, and then they traveled all the way to Prayag, which is the present day. It is called Prayag these days, but a couple of years back it was Allahabad. It has always been Allahabad for a long time, but then Prayag basically is the Kshetra. It's being renamed Prayag by the government recently, around a couple of years back. So they met Mahaprabhu in Prayag, and in Prayag, Mahaprabhu instructed Srila Rupa Goswami, and he instructed Srila Sanatan Goswami, and Anupama Prabhu was present at that point in time as well. Then they all returned back to Bengal at that point in time, and then Mahaprabhu visited them in the village. And while visiting them in the village, this was on the way to Jagannath Puri at that point. First, to Mahaprabhu wanted to go to Varanasi, and then from Varanasi, he was going to Jagannath Puri. That was basically the trip from Bengal to Varanasi, then Varanasi to from Vrindavan to Varanasi, then Varanasi to Jagannath Puri. There was this particular trip that he made where before he went to Jagannath Puri, but he met them in Bengal on the way. Now, whilst meeting them in Bengal, at that point in time, he met Srila Jiva Goswami and he blessed him. And very soon, Jiva Goswami Pad's father passed away. Anupama Prabhu passed away, and he was raised by Srila Rupa and Sanatana, and they were very, 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 very wealthy. They were very wealthy. Present day, they were multi-millionaires in the, as we call, even perhaps billionaires in the Western world. They were that wealthy. They were extraordinarily wealthy. So there was no dearth of resources for Srila Jiva Goswami as he was growing up in terms of completing his studies. There was absolutely no stress in the household. Everything was already arranged. And he was a worshipper of Shri Krishna Balram from his childhood. So he used to have deities of Krishna Balram, and he used to take care of those deities even as a very little boy. He was very attached to Krishna Balram. And then at a point when Mahaprabhu instructed him to go to um, Vrindavan, he first went and met Lord Nityananda. He asked him to go to meet Lord Nityananda, and then when he met Lord Nityananda in Navadvip Mandal, it is said to be an extraordinary meeting. Extraordinary because Srila Jiva Goswami was only 14 years old, 15 years old. He was a teenager. And then Nityananda Ram took him on Navadvip Parikrama. You can read about it in Navadvip Dham Mahatmya. He took him on Navadvip Parikrama. And it is said that this is a very unusual occurrence. He was treated as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's son. Mahaprabhu did not have progeny, but he was treated as Mahaprabhu's son. It is said that on the arrival of Srila Jiva Goswami in Navadvip Mandal, and he visited Mother Sachi, Mahaprabhu's mother, received blessings from her, and then there was a very big feast that was performed, that was prepared, and then he partook the feast. Lord Nityananda honored the feast, and he took the remnants of Lord Nityananda. Now, what is significant is that Srimati Vishnu Priya, she was the one who cooked the feast, and she was never seen outside. Even during Mahaprabhu's time, Srimati Vishnu Priya was never seen outside, but she came and placed her lotus feet upon Jiva Goswami's head, as if a mother would bless a son. So there was this very deep, very special connection between Srila Jiva Goswami and Mahaprabhu, to the point where Mahaprabhu considered him his own child. So there was this very specific benediction. So from there, after going to Navadvip, he went on a parikrama. And one of the things which is also spoken of is that he was given a tour of Navadvip Mandal, where he was practically able to see Lord Gauranga enacting his pastimes with all his devotees in Shiva's Angan. He was practically able to have darshan of Lord Gauranga at the various spots of Navadvip, because Lord Gauranga never leaves Navadvip. He is eternally present. And then this particular discussion takes place between Srila Jiva Goswami and Lord Nityananda. saying, what is the difference between Sri Navadvip Mandal and Vrindavan? What is the difference? Because they are one and the same. They are one and the same. The nine islands of Navadvip are one and the same. There really isn't what we would call a difference between Navadvip Mandal and Vrindavan. However, Lord Nityananda explains to him that even though all rasas can be found in Vrindavan, unless one is free from offenses, they should not go to Vrindavan. They should come to Navadvip. There in Navadvip, they can receive Nam due to the mercy of Lord Nityananda. By receiving Nam due to the mercy of Lord Nityananda, they're able to chant the offenseless name. Then they can come and partake in Sri Vrindavan's seva. So the point is that Lord Nityananda basically said there is no difference between Vrindavan and Navadvip. However, Vrindavan is confidential. There, the divine couple are present as Radha and Krishna. But in Navadvip, the divine couple are present as Lord Chaitanya. So if you have to receive mercy, go to Navadvip first. Receive mercy from Navadvip. And once you receive mercy from Navadvip, you take the dust of Lord Chaitanya, the dust of Lord Nityananda, and then you come in touch with Nam through the Sambandha of a Guru in Navadvip. Then one has the ability to chant Nam. And when the offenseless chanting of Harinam begins, then one has the ability to go to Vrindavan. Because in Vrindavan, there is no tolerance for offenses. In Vrindavan, there is no tolerance for offenses because here the divine couple are engaging in their most confidential pastimes. This is the spiritual sky. In Navadvip, the same divine couple are benedicting because there Krishna has come in the mood of Radharani. He is able to see the fallen jivas. He is able to see that, oh, this is suffering. They are in separation from me. They are in separation from Krishna. This particular benediction of being a part of Navadvip Dham is required. This is the clarification provided by Lord Nityananda himself. So this great personality, Lord Sri Jiva Goswami, Srila Jiva Goswami, he comes in touch with Navadvip Mandal by the design of Mahaprabhu, and he is very specifically given instructions and given the potency to do his work by Lord Nityananda himself. He is given this particular ability. He's given a tour. Imagine being given a tour by Lord Nityananda of Navadvip Mandal. What part of Navadvip Mandal will not manifest itself when Lord Nityananda is with us? Yeah. The dust of Lord Nityananda's lotus feet is present in Mayapur. When one comes in touch with a particle of dust, if you're fortunate enough to have the idea that that dust is not material, the dust of Mayapur is the lotus feet, the dust of the lotus feet of the devotees of Lord Chaitanya. But that attitude is there when paying obeisances in Mayapur. Then, when one pays obeisance and rolls in the dust of Mayapur in Navadvip Mandal, then one has the ability to chant Nam very nicely. And then when one has the ability to chant Nam very nicely, without offenses, they have the ability to come to Vrindavan and to perform bhajan. Because this is very important because in Vrindavan, there's no tolerance for offenses. There is no tolerance. What is the meaning of no tolerance? What is it that happens? What happens is that one has to understand this. This is also from the Navadvip Mahatmya. When Srila Jiva Goswami, he is asking Lord Nityananda, saying, what is the difference between Vrindavan and Navadvip? Then he is also asking him, what is the nature of the spiritual sky? How is it possible that the spiritual sky can coexist with material phenomena? Because Navadvip Mandal and Vrindavan Dham, these are also interspersed or situated within what we would call a geographic, or I would say, surrounded by what I would call as very, very material phenomena. How do you distinguish? Then Lord Nityananda explains to Srila Jiva Goswami. He says there's a very thin layer of material energy that covers the spiritual sky in these two places. Very thin layer of material energy that covers the spiritual sky, which means both Navadvip and Vrindavan are the spiritual sky. There are eternal pastimes. There are sadhus whom we cannot see who are constantly meditating on the holy names and on the holy names of Gaura and the holy names of Sri Sri Radha and Krishna, respectively, in Navadvip and in Vrindavan. We cannot see them. They have been here for millions of years. They're engaging in Nam Bhajan so that they could relish Nam in the spiritual sky. And then there's Leela, which is occurring all around us. Yeah. There's Leela that is occurring all around us in Navadvip and in Vrindavan. Now, There is a material layer. The material layer, the thin material layer that covers the dham in both places, practically is a layer which exists in such a way that if one is situated in a material consciousness, which means they are predominated by the modes of passion and ignorance, they are predominated by the modes of passion and ignorance, which is material consciousness. Yeah, when we use the word nashtaprayeshu, abhadreshu, inauspiciousness is nothing but passion and ignorance. So when they're covered over by passion and ignorance, when there's very heavy passion and ignorance in the hearts of those, then what does happen is that they fall on the thin layer of material energy. They start thinking that they are on, basically, in this world. They cannot visualize spiritual phenomena. When you come to Vrindavan, why is it that we are asked to go and then take darshan of Lord Gopeshwar Mahadev? Gopeshwar Mahadev sits right at the gate of Vrindavan. If you come to Vrindavan, you can see Vamsivat. So he is sitting right at the Rasa Mandal, where you have to go and take his mercy and take his blessings and offer respects to him. It is very unusual. In the morning, this deity of Lord Shiva is a Shivling. They worship him as they would a Shivling. In the evening, he gets dressed as a gopi. So you can see him in this particular vesha of a gopi in the evening, which is extraordinary. You wouldn't be able to recognize that there was a shivling there. There would be a very nice, beautiful gopi dress that he wears. Now, this particular deity of Lord Shiva is first visited. Why do we visit him? Because he is Guru. He is representing the potency of Lord Nityananda. Yeah. He is an expansion of Lord Nityananda. Shivji is an expansion of Lord Nityananda. He is constantly meditating on Lord Nityananda. As a consequence, you go and visit him here first and beg him for mercy. And what is the mercy which Gopeshwar Mahadev grants us when we come here to Vrindavan? He grants us the mercy of being able to see the spiritual phenomena, which means he grants us the mercy of lifting that particular material layer, the very thin material layer, and allowing us to experience what is Vraja. So, if you want to experience Vraja, you need the blessings of Sri Gopeshwar Mahadev. You need his blessings. He is there. Without his blessings, you cannot distinguish the material versus spiritual. Yeah, he is the spiritual master of the whole world. He is representing Balaram. He is representing Lord Nityananda. As a consequence, the potency of being able to variegate, see the difference between the spiritual and the material layer is being given by Sri Gopeshwar Mahadev. He is there. You have to take shelter of him. So, in a similar vein, in Navadvip Mandal, without the mercy of Lord Nityananda, one cannot really have any vision of Navadvip Mandal. So when we go to Navadvip Mandal and we are able to basically get a dust from the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda, if you roll around, if you're very lucky, you'll come in touch with a particle of dust touched by the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda. And that would be the end of a material journey. It's over. The spiritual journey begins with great gusto. And then one comes in touch with a realized soul. Sambandha Gyan is received from the heart of the Guru. He gives us beads, he instructs us, and then we are able to chant Harinam. And then when we chant Harinam offenselessly, then we come to Vraja, then we have the ability to serve in Vraja as well. So this was explained as a distinct factor. So you can be in Vrindavan, you can be in Mayapur, and you can be on the material layer. It is thin. Why do I use the word thin? Because if you're a sadhaka, a serious sadhaka, the layer lifts immediately. You can see spiritual phenomena. It is not difficult. However, if we are situated in material energy, which means passion and ignorance, then we have a problem. If we have received the mercy of a great soul, then we have the ability to lift ourselves from our own passion and ignorance. We have the ability to develop deeper sambandha with Rajabhumi and with Navadvip Dham. So Srila Jiva Goswami toured the entire Navadvip Dham along with Lord Nityananda, and Lord Nityananda bid him, gave him instructions. The instructions were that you must study in Varanasi and you must then go to Vrindavan. Study in Varanasi and then go to Vrindavan. Study Vedanta and then go to Vrindavan. Study and understand the different commentaries by the great acharyas including Sri Shankaracharya's Sharirika Bhashya. These are commentaries on the Vedanta, but then after studying all of this Vedanta and understanding the different Bhashyas of the different groups and the different commentaries, go to Sri Vrindavan Dham and then broadcast the mercy and the potency of Srimad Bhagavatam. This was the instruction received by Srila Jiva Goswami. And he proceeded to go to Varanasi first, and then he practically proceeded from Varanasi to Vrindavan to the tutelage of his uncles, Srila Rupa and Sri Sanatana. He became a disciple. He's the only disciple of Srila Rupa Goswami. He is the only known documented disciple of Srila Rupa Goswami. Srila Jiva Goswami is the disciple of Srila Rupa Goswami, his own uncle. Yeah, he took Diksha from him. But then the point we are trying to make here is that his journey that embarked from a village in Mayapur started with the dust of the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya. He literally was able to suckle on Lord Chaitanya's big toe. You can just imagine the sight. Lord Gauranga standing there, resplendent, golden, extraordinarily effulgent, and then this baby holding on to the lotus feet of Lord Gauranga and placing his big toe in his mouth. Can you imagine that sight? This baby, was practically empowered from, such an young, very, very young age. So we basically have come across someone who has received mercy at such a young age from Mahaprabhu, and then he is practically comes to Vrindavan and then stays with his uncles, and he broadcasts the message of Srimad Bhagavatam. What I plan to do is that I will talk about Srila Jiva Goswami again in the next week's session as well, which means that we will talk a little bit more about him. Perhaps if we do come across the Tirobhav anniversaries of our acharyas, then we will speak about them. So I will speak about him in the following week because um, his work is the foundation of everything that we are reading today. Everything. Everything that we read from Srila Prabhupada has come from the Sandarbhas of Srila Jiva Goswami. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur drew from his work. And Srila Jiva Goswami established Srimad Bhagavatam, and his commentaries on the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Sat Sandarbhas, are the foundation of establishing Srimad Bhagavatam and breaking it down into Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana Tattva. This is basically the three different concepts, and he practically establishes Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana Tattva by drawing upon the verses of Srimad Bhagavatam in his six sandarbhas, the Sat Sandarbhas. And those sandarbhas themselves are the foundation of the writings of our acharyas. So, what I will do is that we will go into today's discussion of Srimad Bhagavatam, but I wanted to briefly touch upon and glorify, who are we to glorify the great personality, but speak about so that we could remember and we could, become grateful for being a part of a lineage which is connected to Srila Jiva Goswami, which is just fascinating. Our lineage is so fascinating. The parampara that we belong to is so fascinating. We have so much access to these great personalities. And we will talk a little bit more about him in the subsequent session. Here in Vrindavan, his Tirobhav is celebrated in the Sri Sri Radha Damodar Mandir, and the Radha Damodar Mandir is in Seva Kunj, and the celebration is done for 3 days practically, which is yesterday, and then today, and then tomorrow. 3 days. So we will talk about his glorification in the subsequent week. We will talk a little bit more about, how he began his work, some of the challenges, and also understand his work and what was the work that he offered. To whatever extent we can appreciate, his work and his contribution to our uh, what I would call as storehouse of transcendental literature, because he was one of the, I would say, the Tattva Acharya. He established the whole concept of understanding Krishna consciousness without a doubt, philosophically, in a very scientific manner. He established that. So he is basically, I would say, from the perspective of transcendental literature, he is the authority for us amongst our lineage. His work is practically the foundation of everything. So we will talk about it again the subsequent week. and as a matter of remembering and understanding his work. I just wanted to start off by today just giving a little example of where he came from and the wonderful mercy. How often could you see a soul who could receive mercy as an infant from Mahaprabhu, who could be given a tour of Navadvip Dham by Nityananda Ram himself, who receives the blessings of Mother Vishnupriya, who is considered to be a son, where he was fed by the cooking of Mother Vishnupriya. She never used to openly contribute this way. So this is very, very different. He ate the prasadam cooked by Mother Vishnupriya. So it was very, 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 I would say, distinct from anybody else. And then he has the ability to practically be connected to Srila Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis. And his contribution is exemplary. Today we see that the contribution itself is just amazing. The kind of distribution of literature, taking Srila Narottam Das Thakur, Shamananda Prabhu, Srinivas Acharya into under his wing, giving them tutelage, and then inspiring and even I would say guiding Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami used to consider Srila Jiva Goswami as a Siksha Guru. Even though Srila Jiva Goswami was much, much younger, he used to consider him as a Siksha Guru because he was an authority. He was also basically given instructions by Srila Gopala Bhatta Goswami because he was also present in Vrindavan at that point in time. So we'll discuss some of the literature in the subsequent session. Discuss in the sense we can't go deeper, but we'll at least understand the essence of what was done. So we will be able to appreciate the offering. And someday in the future, if we have an opportunity, we would probably be able to study it closer in a deeper way. Once we finish and we are able to fully comprehend Srila Prabhupada's books and we are able to live according to Srila Prabhupada's instructions, then we can go to our predecessor acharyas, the Rasika acharyas. But without the foundation provided by Srila Prabhupada, then we really have no chance. So I just want to clarify that as much as all of this is attractive, if you haven't really done justice to Srila Prabhupada's books in terms of reading, then we really haven't gone very far. So we should stick to completing Srila Prabhupada's books, especially Srimad Bhagavatam. And as the Naam increases in its glory in our hearts, as the lotus of Naam starts sprouting, it starts opening up and blossoming in our heart, then Srimad Bhagavatam will blossom as well in our heart. Therefore, even if you have read Srimad Bhagavatam once, the more serious we become with Naam, we should again go back and read Srimad Bhagavatam because it is Naam which practically is going to instruct us in Srimad Bhagavatam. We have spoken about this several times that we need to chant, and then once we chant, then we receive instructions, then we can go towards Krishna, who is Srimad Bhagavatam himself. And it is Nam who is going to give us the experience of what the devotees of Chaitanya Charitamrita went through. So the entire foundation of our existence is Nam. And as a consequence, what we must do is understand that we should proceed with caution in going into the writings of the Rasika Acharyas, the great souls who have preceded us. We should always hold on to the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada through his writings, the Srimad Bhagavatam, imbibe the Srimad Bhagavatam, develop the seriousness of chanting Harinam as given in Srimad Bhagavatam, live according to Srimad Bhagavatam, and then we'll have the opportunity to understand the writings of the previous acharyas, including Srila Jiva Goswami Pad. Now, Srila Jiva Goswami Pad's books have been extracted. In other words, Srila Prabhupada's purports have drawn from them. There's a contextual reference in means of time, place, and circumstances, which modifies Srila Prabhupada's writings based on the understanding of the audience and the complexity of their, the topic versus the ability to understand based on the present time. However, it has been drawn from Srila Jiva Goswami's work, the translations and everything else. So we'll go into it the following week. I also wanted to initiate the discussion on chapter 5, and then I will open up for questions. I wanted to have a shorter session today, and the subsequent session, we will have a full session. We'll go deeper. One moment. Let me just start with the 5th chapter of Canto 3. We will initiate some discussion. We will talk a little bit about the background, and then we'll catch up the subsequent week. Now, these chapters of Canto 3, they are basically chapters of discussions of Sri Vidura. And we'll start with chapter 5. So let's chant prayers for Srimad Bhagavatam, and then we will start with chapter 5. Shrinarayana namaskrityam naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam mudirayet. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. So from the preceding chapter, we spoke of a few topics of discussion, and the main topic which was discussed in the previous sessions were the meeting between Sri Vidura and Sri Uddhava, who is a cousin, who is a much younger cousin of Krishna from the Dwaraka Leela, the Dwaraka pastimes. Very advanced devotee. In other words, he was a constant companion of Krishna, and he also looked like Krishna in appearance. And Sri Vidura meets with him on the banks of the Yamuna in Mathura and has a discussion about the experiences and the disappearance pastimes of Krishna. And at that point in time, Sri Uddhava describes to him the whole pastime of disappearance, but he chokes up because he really can't go any further as he remembers, in separation from the Lord, he is unable to speak further. And what he does is basically gives him a gist of the disappearance. And in that particular gist, Sri Uddhava describes the fact that other than him, there was Sri Maitreya Muni, the Maitreya Rishi, the great personality, who was also present when Krishna departed. And this was very significant. It was very significant because Krishna uses Sri Uddhava as a proxy to enthuse Maitreya, Sri Maitreya Rishi. He practically talks to him and says that because your desire was to attain my lotus feet, if your desire was to constantly be my companion, you will come back to Vaikunta, but now you must go to Naimisharanya and you must have darshan of Naranarayan Rishi. You must engage in penance, you must engage in austerities. So he basically requests Sri Uddhava to go to Naimisharanya, but he enthuses Sri Maitreya Rishi, who is also a listener, because he's present there, and he enthuses him by saying that he tells Uddhava, he's using Uddhava as an instrument. He's saying, because you only desired of wanting to come and then be with me all the time, you're being granted the desire. And the distinguishing factor is Sri Maitreya was an extraordinarily accomplished personality. He was a great personality. However, he was a jnani. He was a jnani, and jnana was of a greater level of dominance than the prospect of bhakti. So Krishna wanted him to receive sambandha. And how do you give sambandha? You give sambandha by using someone else as an instrument. Yeah. Sambandha is basically an idea of basically enthusing people based on your own connection with the Lord. So if someone has a very deep connection with the Lord in their heart, they have very deep faith because they have experiences with the Lord. And that faith and that experience can practically manifest in the form of sound vibrations that can enter into a third party's hearing, and then they can basically, enter and also receive the same sambandha, which means the sound vibration from the lips of someone who has deep sambandha has the ability to inculcate sambandha in the hearts of the listener. Bhakti Devi goes from one heart to another. So Krishna reminded Sri Uddhava that your only prospect, your only objective ever, and regardless of where you were, because Sri Uddhava was so exalted that some of his expansions were serving as demigods. He was a Vasu. Even though Sri Uddhava expanded as a demigod, even that particular demigod incarnation also only wanted to attain eternal service at the lotus feet of Krishna. So Krishna practically reminded Uddhava that because you have always desired to be in my company constantly, I'm going to grant you the desire. Now, I'm going to grant you the desire, and that desire will be fulfilled. You just have to go to Naimisharanya, and then from Naimisharanya, you'll come back to my eternal Dham. Now, what is happening here is that because Sri Maitreya was present, Bhakti Devi can leave Sri Uddhava's heart as Uddhava replies to Krishna in deep gratitude. The sound vibration from Sri Uddhava's mouth carries Bhakti Devi into the hearts of Sri Maitreya. And this is to accomplish this, Krishna basically has a dialogue with Sri Uddhava in the presence of Sri Maitreya. Now, Sri Vidura wants to have a number of questions answered, and he is asking Sri Uddhava, saying, "Where should I go? I want to talk to you. Can you enlighten me? What did you hear from the Supreme Lord? Why? What was the reason for Sri Vidura's question? The reason was because Krishna reminds Uddhava about the gist of Srimad Bhagavatam that he spoke to Lord Brahma. Sri Uddhava basically talks about it. Krishna instructs Sri Uddhava on the gist of Srimad Bhagavatam as spoken to Lord Brahma. Sri Vidura becomes very interested. And what is the gist? The gist is the Chatushloki of Srimad Bhagavatam. This was the instruction received by Lord Brahma from Krishna himself. And that gist was spoken of in the meeting between Uddhava and Krishna in the presence of Maitreya Rishi. And Sri Uddhava, the moment he mentions this, Vidura becomes very curious. He becomes very interested in wanting to learn. He's very enthusiastic in wanting to learn as to what transpired in that exchange between Krishna and Sri Uddhava and Maitreya Rishi. Sri Uddhava does not want to instruct Vidura because Vidura is very aged. Compared to Sri Uddhava, he was much, much older. He was as old as Krishna's father. So, which means, at least one generation above or two generations above. And as a consequence, Sri Uddhava did not want to play the role of guru. Then the other point was that there was someone much older than Sri Uddhava, which was Maitreya, Sri Maitreya Rishi, who was very close by. It would also be considered to be a lack of etiquette if Uddhava takes up Sri Vidura under his wing, even though he was supremely qualified to do so. He was supremely qualified to do so. He wanted to follow the etiquette of not wanting to offend the other Vaishnav who is much older and who is present on the planet and who is also in proximity. So he is directing Sri Vidura to go and inquire on different topics from Sri Maitreya Rishi. Now, this chapter is where Sri Vidura comes in touch with Maitreya and then asks of him to elaborate on the different topics of the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is going to be the basis of the rest of the discussion on the canto. So we will just read a couple of verses, a few verses, and then what we will do is we will elaborate further in subsequent sessions. So the first verse, and this is Canto 3, Chapter 5, Vidura's talks with Maitreya. Sukadev Goswami said, Vidura, the best among the Kuru dynasty, who was perfect in devotional service to the Lord, thus reached the source of the celestial Ganges river, Haridwar, where Maitreya, the great fathomless learned sage of the world, was seated. Vidura, who was perfect in gentleness and satisfied in transcendence, inquired from him. So Maitreya was actually waiting. In one sense, he was basically in Haridwar, which is very close. So he goes to Haridwar from Mathura, from Yamuna, and um, Sri Uddhava is being described here as perfect in gentleness and satisfied in transcendence. What is the meaning of satisfied in transcendence? Satisfied in transcendence means that he is already liberated. He is already transcendentally situated. He is already liberated. He is already beyond the material world. He is also extraordinarily gentle. But then the topics of Sambandha with Krishna are beyond the material world. They are completely transcendental and they can engage those who are also liberated. So this is the point which is being given here, is that Sri Vidura was not interested in liberation. He was not interested in karmakanda. He was not going around the different pilgrimage sites trying to basically what I would call as receive punya or I would say sacred credits or sukriti, as we would call it. That was not his objective. His objective to gain materially, that was not his objective. His objective was to meet sadhus. And here, Sri Vidura is being described as being transcendently situated and very gentle, which means that there was a great sage, Maitreya, who had fathomless knowledge and he was extraordinary in his prowess, who was present during the departure of the Lord, who received Sambandha from the Lord himself, because the Lord was so merciful. He received Sambandha from the Lord through the agency of Sri Uddhava. And here was Sri Vidura, the perfect vehicle to receive that Sambandha. You see, the beauty is that he was perfectly qualified. So he was not there with an objective of wanting to attain anything material. He was not there with the objective of wanting to be relieved from this particular existence because he was transcendently situated. He was gentle. What is the meaning of being gentle? Being gentle means he was in the mode of goodness and he was also beyond the mode of goodness. So his behavior exemplified the mode of goodness, and he was also beyond the mode of goodness because he's talking about being transcendently situated. And as a consequence, he was a perfect vehicle to receive topics of a higher nature. Yeah. So this is basically a pathway for us to also imbibe and understand that a very common example that is often shared about is the fact that if you want to travel someplace, you need to get to the airport. You need to basically clear the airport before you can ever get on a plane and then travel and then reach a destination. Now, the airport in our context is the mode of goodness. Therefore, if we really don't have a chance of being able to imbibe and receive transcendental topics into our heart when we are in the mode of passion and ignorance, it's not possible. It's not going to happen. The topic basically of very deep, I would say, transcendence is going to come beyond the mode of goodness. So one has to at least be in the mode of goodness for us to be able to use it as a platform so that we could take off. So our whole regulative principles, the idea of waking up, engaging in Guru Puja, receiving all of this mercy, and the whole concept of anartha nivirti is to give up passion and ignorance and reach goodness. What is anartha? Anartha is nothing but passion and ignorance. Abhadreshu is passion and ignorance. Giving up passion, giving up ignorance, the anarthas are given up. And then one reaches the point of being situated in pure goodness, in elevated goodness at least, where the perception of passion and ignorance is very, very minimal. And as a consequence, one has the ability to receive transcendental truth. This was seen by us in Lord Brahma's endeavor. Lord Brahma was transcendently situated. In other words, he was situated in the highest planet in Satyaloka, in the highest mode of goodness. And as a consequence, he was very proximate and he was able to chant for 1,000 years. He was able to perform his tapasya and receive instructions from the Lord. So, the point we are trying to make is that it is necessary for us to understand that the whole concept of anartha nivirti is to be relieved of passion and ignorance. The whole concept is to be relieved of passion and ignorance. Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu. Abhadreshu is passion and ignorance. One is in passion, they have attachment, they will have desires to accomplish in this world. One is in ignorance, which is even worse. The point being that one cannot really receive transcendental knowledge, very specifically sambandha, in the lower modes of passion and ignorance. We have to be situated in the higher mode of goodness, and then we receive sambandha gyan that enthuses us, and we proceed towards our goal of increasing our sambandha with Krishna. So here in this verse, he is being described as being perfect in gentleness. Gentleness is a symptom of someone who is peaceful, who is very, basic behavior is extraordinarily gentle. This is basically the qualities of goodness. And then he's also being described as being satisfied in transcendence. He is satisfied. He is not in a quest to either end something or to begin something. He isn't. He is actually quite satisfied. Equipoise is the word. Now, this is the state where one is qualified to receive a greater level of knowledge. There's a greater level of sambandha that comes in, and we become accessible. We put ourselves in a position of being able to receive things in this particular situation. So, when we have to understand this concept of anartha nivritti, we have to simplify it and we have to understand, it is basically giving up passion and ignorance. It is basically elevating a consciousness from passion and ignorance. This is all we are trying to do with the process of anartha nivritti. That is easily accomplished through the auspices of the holy names. The holy names liberates us. What is it liberating us from? The holy name is liberating us at the stage of namabas. The chanting becomes offenseless. When is it offensive? Harinam is offensive when there is a deep level of passion and ignorance that is contained in the heart. Why? In passion, the devotee is aspiring for so many things in the world. Yeah, there are so many different attachments. The identities the devotee has is nothing but ignorance. So, in such a situation, what we are talking about is that offensive chanting is all about being in passion and ignorance. And the cure for passion and ignorance is again chanting of Harinam. So, we need to work on offenseless chanting. What is it that we need to do? We, at the very least, need to ensure that we are able to speak and hear Harinam diligently every day. Speak and hear, whisper, but cogently so that you're able to hear what you're whispering. This would practically cure us of passion and ignorance. When the cure for passion and ignorance has occurred and we are in the mode of goodness, then we have the ability to receive sambandha. There would be information that would come to us just as much as Lord Brahma received information. Here, Sri Vidura is gentle and he is also situated in transcendence. As a consequence, he is now ready to receive a more elaborate, complex topic of Sambandha from Sri Maitreya. He is wanting to know the topics of Srimad Bhagavatam that were discussed. Now let's look at the second text. Vidura said, "O great sage, everyone in this world engages in fruitive activities to attain happiness, but one finds neither satiation nor the mitigation of distress. On the contrary, one is only aggravated by such activities. Please, therefore, give us instructions on how one should live for real happiness." Yeah, I'm going to stop here because we are right at the beginning. We might as well do it the following week. I'll stop here and we will take this up in the following session. And then we could kind of complete the chapter to the extent possible.